this is an introduction to the seQe system. You can see the hardware is connected up to a display that's motion activated. So when you trigger using motion, it illuminates the electroluminescent panel. So I'm going to show you how we do that using the seQe software. So this is the seQe dialog box. This is where we create our light sequences. First thing we have to do is set the collection location. This is where we save all our files so that we can upload to the hardware once we've finished. The next thing we do is add our panels and layout. You can see the program by default gives you one panel to work with. The minimum amount of panels you can work with is 1, and the maximum is 8, and that corresponds to the hardware. So I'm going to add some more panels here. You can add as many as you like, between 1 and 8, and once you've got the right amount, you can actually just move them around and start creating a pattern that corresponds with your end application. It's really just a visual tool to help you see what your end light sequence is going to look like. So once you're happy, click complete and give it a file name. The next thing we do is add a sequence. So this is where we add our light. So if I click on the button add sequence, you can see it gives us some parameters to work with. But the first thing we have to do is click on and activate each light. Now these are activated, they've turned black. Black in the real world represents the light being off. If I click them again, they turn pink. Pink represents on. So because I'm doing a fairly simple sequence, i.e. when the trigger's triggered, it turns all the lights on, and when it's not triggered, the lights are off. I've already done my sequence. It's a fairly simple all-on sequence. But before I save my file, I'm going to add some time. You add time by adding the steps. Each step represents 0.5 of a second. So the longer that you want your light on for or off for, the more steps you give it. So I'm happy with that. I'm going to click sequence done, give it a file name and save it. Now I'm going to add another sequence, so I click add sequence, and this time I want all my lights to be off. So I'm just going to simply click them all to the turn black, and I therefore know that the light will be off in real time. So I'll add a little bit of time and I will save that file. So save. You can of course at this stage add much more sequences, and you can make them a lot more complex regarding with what your design is. But I'm finished for today. Can keep this short and sweet. So let's go back to the main dialog box. The next thing to do is add a super sequence. Super sequences are a collection of sequences. So in the previous stage you might well have designed 3 or 4 sequences, and this gives you the opportunity to group those together to make one big sequence or one super sequence. But because we've only created 2 sequences, this is going to be a fairly simple process. So I'm going to call sequence number 1, ask it to repeat 100 times and save my super sequence. I'm going to add another super sequence, and this time call sequence number 2, ask it to repeat 100 times and save the file. Again, at this stage you can make it a lot more complex depending on what your design requires. But I'm finished for now, so I'm going to click complete. Takes me back to the dialog box. Now what we can do at this stage is run a simulation, so we can just check what our files are doing, so we can double check that what we've designed is correct before we upload it. So I'm going to call super sequence number 1 and run it, and there all the lights are on. It's exactly what we needed or what we wanted. Now if I call super sequence number 2 and run it, all the lights are off, exactly as we designed. So that's good. If we exit that, we can come back to the dialog box. And the last thing we need to do before we upload any data is set up our pads. Now on the hardware there's 8 trigger inputs, and these correlate to the 8 pad numbers in the software. Each pad has an action, either on or off, and it's really up to you how you manipulate that to work for your design. What I want to do is make sure that when something is triggered, all the lights turn on, and when that trigger is taken away, all the lights turn off. So with pad action on, I'm going to call super sequence number 1, which if you remember, we designed it so that all our lights are on, and save that to each trigger input or pad. Pad action off is now displayed, so I'm going to call super sequence number 2, and again save that to all the trigger inputs. Once you've finished, it automatically takes you back to the dialog box once again. On the right hand side of the screen, it gives you a summary of the data that you've created. So it tells you how many sequences you've designed, how many super sequences you've combined, and whether or not your pads are set. Once you're happy with all your data, now's the time to transfer to the hardware, to upload your data. So click Transfer to EL System. Sometimes it takes a bit of time. And there we have it, upload in progress. And what you'll notice if you pan back to the display is that all the pads automatically go on, and that just is an indication that your transfer has worked. So what we need to do is give it a trigger input. So I'm just going to activate it with motion, and there we have no trigger input, so no lights. Trigger input, lights are on, and that's using the motion sensor there. Also got a little pressure pad set up, so pressure on, lights are on. Take the pressure away, the lights are on. And that is how simple it is to design an interactive display using the seQe software.